Alright everyone, Nikki Haley is in pretty deep doo-doo. She took one hell of a beating over the last 48 hours in the wake of her Civil War comments, of course ignoring slavery's role in the Civil War. As I pointed out, there is a nuance to the Civil War. It was partially about tariffs and partially about representation, and slavery was not actually the main issue at all times during the Civil War. Most often it was misunderstandings of an economic and social nature more than anything else. Slavery, of course, compounding the problem. Specifically, the other day, somebody tried to muddy the waters by putting out a piece of literature. It was basically Mississippi's statement on secession at the time when they joined the Confederacy. And of course, to them, it was more about slavery, and so they mentioned that. That wasn't the reason why all of the states that seceded, though. It was mentioned. Certainly, the slave debate was raging at the time. I would point out that a number of northern states maintained slavery, including some all the way through the Civil War. This nuance is again lost. But that nuance is meaningless. When you are talking to the American public, you are talking to a public that, by and large, got public education and does not understand the nuance of the Civil War. I took AP U.S. history. I was not taught the entire nuance either. These separate economic and social issues that barely involve slavery or didn't involve them at all were not covered in that curriculum. This is in one of, I think at the time, the #1 state for education at one of the top 10 schools in that state in an AP course. Not many people, unless they became a historian or something specifically focusing on the 19th century United States, most of them aren't going to understand. So when 90% of your audience does think that the Civil War was solely and only about slavery, and then you mention states' rights and don't mention slavery at all, that's not going to resonate with the audience. You can tell it by some of their responses, like, what's going on here? Maybe they thought she was having a stroke or something. But then she decided to clarify her comments. And I'm going to read you a little bit of this verbatim. She probably shouldn't have bothered to clarify. She probably should have just fucking doubled down. I mean, of course the Civil War was about slavery, Haley told radio host Jack Heath Thursday morning. But what's the lesson in all that? She continued. That we need to make sure that every person has freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom to do and be anything they want without anyone or government getting in the way. That was the goal of what that was at. Yes, I know about slavery. I'm from the South. Of course I know it's about slavery. Well, but you didn't point that out in the first round. It slipped your mind. You neglected to mention what you deemed the most important part of the central cause for the Civil War. I don't believe that, though, and nobody else believes that either. I mean, I think the cause of the Civil War is basically how government was going to run. The freedoms and what people could and couldn't do, Haley said Wednesday in a visit to Berlin, the first of 5 events in the Granite State. She attempts to close the gap with Republican frontrunner Donald Trump ahead of the month's primary. I don't think she's going to close that gap. If anything, I think this hurts her quite a bit. Again, when 80-90% of the people that are listening to your speech think that you've plumb lost your mind, that probably doesn't go over so well. Trump gets castigated all the time. All he has to say is, oh, what a fine rain. And the newsprint will say, oh, Trump loves rainy days because he hates fun, or something like that. Nikki Haley is a media darling. They almost never go after her. You may have noticed, even the left-wing legacy media rarely attacks Nikki Haley. Even they had to cover this one. They're too busy with Donald Trump and Ron DeSantis because they represent MAGA and MAGA light, and that's what really peeves them. Nikki Haley is a nice, safe neocon. She's basically like Mike Pence with boobs. That's basically her selling point. If you vote for Nikki Haley is effectively a vote for, hey, let's see what would happen if Mike Pence were president. I don't think that the Republican voters really want that, and if you look at polling in virtually every state other than New Hampshire, which is wonky because Christie is actually in 3rd place there, other than that, Nikki Haley, she doesn't even have a political pulse in her own home state. If you want to talk about lost causers, I think that Nikki Haley's campaign definitely fits that particular moniker. She's insane. If you mess up this bad, you either go all in, you don't bother to elaborate, you unequivocally apologize and say, I'm sorry, I misspoke, or make an excuse, I misunderstood the question. At least your core fans will believe you. But Nikki Haley has one other detrimental attribute to her character that makes this worse for her than it would for a bumbling candidate. She is rhetorically talented. Of all the people that actually went to the debates, I'm Team Trump. Of the people up on stage there, Nikki Haley was the best spoken. She didn't have the best points, that would be Ramaswamy, but she delivered them the best. She was the most rhetorically talented candidate on the last debate stage and on the debate stage the 3 times prior. When you are considered to be rhetorically talented and intelligent, not necessarily good, not necessarily correct, but talented and intelligent, smart, sharp, etc., you can get away with less. People are held to different standards according to their perceived aptitude. A person who is highly intelligent who fucks up is castigated more than someone who's a total moron who fucks up. You expect the moron to potentially fuck up, but you're like a moron smokes crack and gets addicted. We don't judge them so much. Like, oh, well, Steve over there has always been a retard. I'm not surprised he's smoking crack. Oh, well, at least we'll have, you see him do funny crack dance and stuff. Then you have the honors student with the 150 IQ who makes the mistake of getting addicted to methamphetamine as a study buddy or something. Everyone judges them. So Nikki Haley is going to be judged more harshly than if Chris Christie made such a foible. People would say, well, it's Christie making mistakes as always. He's doing his little Sambo dance thing. He's being entirely self-deprecating. He's out of his league, but you would expect that. If Vivek Ramaswamy says something that's off the chain and makes no sense, it's like, okay, he took an extra Ritalin before his speech. With Nikki Haley, she's seen as the smooth, refined neocon. The neocons love her for this reason. They're like, oh my god, a verbose version of George W.? We can get a war and soaring speeches about the necessity to wage the war? Oh, they're orgasming over. The warmongers love the idea. She's nuts for having effectively, in her response, she's like, well, I'm really, really sorry, but at the same time, here's an elaboration that excuses what I said before. No, don't do that. Don't middle of the road it. Go swing to one side or the other. Either say, well, I stand by what I said. Yeah, states' rights played an outsized role. Yeah, slavery played a role, but I was asking a more specific question, or I didn't understand it. Or just say, I unequivocally apologize. I didn't mean to offend anyone. It was shitty of me, and it was an oversight. I didn't mean anything by it. Of course, I know that slavery was the only cause of the Civil War. Haha, don't we all know that nothing else played any role whatsoever? Half the population fully believes that, and another significant proportion of the population mostly believes that. That was the audience that she had to woo over. She didn't woo any voters. She got a couple of neo-Confederates. Maybe it was a swing for her home state. Well, sorry I removed your Robert E. Lee statue, but I'll talk about the Civil War and from the lost causer position, and maybe then they'll vote for me. She'll get the remnant alt-right vote or something. I don't think so. Nobody really has the stomach other than idiots and complete out there war hawks for that kind of presidency right now anyway. You had one job, which was to stay rhetorically skilled enough to at least eke out a decent second place in New Hampshire, and right at the very last moment, with only weeks to go until Iowa and not long after New Hampshire, you really made a big mistake. A really big stumble. You were just gaining on Trump, narrowing it in her own internal polling supposedly to single digits, but I don't believe that. But you wouldn't have done badly. Even if you got curb stomped in Iowa, at the very least you could argue viability long enough to stay in for Super Tuesday, hope you do better than Ron DeSantis, and then be the only anti-Trump candidate, so at least you get some delegates. At least you get some attention. And at the very least then you have a platform to launch for a future bid, which I wouldn't support either, because Nikki Haley, a future bid or a different political office. Now that you've got more name recognition, you say, okay, Nikki Haley for Senate or something like that. Beto O'Rourke tried to do this quite clearly. Almost made it too. Now Nikki Haley, it looks like she might have just crushed her own dreams. And I love it. That's about all. Peace out.